Okay, what we're going to look at today in lesson P2 is we're going to start out by just talking a little bit about the Cartesian coordinate plane, which we also call the rectangular coordinate system. Okay. There are different types of coordinate systems that we may get to in either this class or the next or something in the future. There is actually one on the front board over here. See that circular one that I have stuff covering it? Okay, that's actually a coordinate plane as well. Okay. For most of our work that we're going to do, though, we'll be using the Cartesian coordinate plane. Okay. And the first skill that we have to look at today is just making sure that we know how to plot points on the coordinate plane. So recognizing that coordinates always come in pairs of x and y. Okay. The x coordinate and the y coordinate listed in that order, of course. And when we plot points, we always begin at 0, 0, which is the origin, we know. And if we plot the point 4, 2, okay, we start with the x direction, so we go 4 in the x direction and then 2 in the y direction, and we find that location 4, 2. Point Q is -6, -4, and of course they went, in order to do that, they went 6 to the left, and then 4 down, and plotted that point. Okay, so part of our work today is going to be just plotting points and making sure that we're clear on where points are located on the rectangular coordinate system or the Cartesian coordinate plane. Okay. Now, a couple other features of the plane just to make sure we're clear. You'll see it in here. It's labeled the x-axis and the y-axis, of course. And once again, this is stuff that we've done quite a bit of in the past, so I'm assuming that this is mostly review for us. But keeping in mind that we have, again, the horizontal axis is the x-axis, the vertical axis is the y-axis. Okay. All right. The other vocab that we're going to look at here, we're going to have to answer questions about, is this idea of a quadrant. When we look at the coordinate plane, the upper right-hand area of the coordinate plane above the x-axis and to the right of the y-axis, of course, is the first. And then the second, if we go to the left, and then, of course, third, and then fourth. So if we were given a particular point, like, say, 2, -6, the question might be, what quadrant would that point be in? Well, if we have 2, -6, we would go 2 to the right, 6 down, and that would put us in the fourth. Okay. And based on just looking at the signs, even if we didn't know the actual numbers, we could tell what quadrant it's in, because in the first quadrant, both signs are going to be positive. In the second quadrant, we'd have to have a -x and a positive y. So in general, it'd be something of the form -x, +y. Third quadrant, we'd have a -x because we're left, -y because we're down, and then finally the fourth quadrant would have +x and a -y. So just from looking at the points without having to actually plot them, we should be able to tell also what quadrant they belong in. There's one other vocabulary word that's not on this list that I'm going to add to this. If we had a point like, say, 3, 0, okay, we might ask, well, what quadrant is that in? Okay. It's really not in a quadrant, it's on one of the lines. True? So the word that we use for that, if we have a point that's actually on one of the lines, or it could be on both, it could be the origin itself, okay, we call that quadrantal. Okay. So that 3, 0 point is not in any quadrant, it's actually a quadrantal point. Questions so far? All right, I want you to look in your book with me on page 32. I'll put it on the overhead as well. Probably one of the most important things that we learn math for is to use it to do things that actually matter in life. Okay. And one of the most common ways we use math is to study data, and we'll be doing a lot of that in this class. We've done a lot of it previous, but we will be doing that quite a bit more in this class, of studying data and using data to perhaps write equations, okay, and using those equations to make predictions about certain situations, whether they be ideas from business or science or whatever they may be from. Okay. But if you look at this number 32 that I have here, the directions are, it says the total in billions of dollars of U.S. agricultural exports from 1996 to 2003. And ultimately, notice that the x coordinates, if you will, in our chart here, this is our independent variable. And anytime there's time involved, and that's almost exclusively going to be our x coordinate, if you will. Okay, our y coordinate then will be the other, which in this case is the billions of dollars. Okay. And the directions here in this part, which is going to be part of your work in a few minutes, is just to draw a scatter plot of the data in the given table. Okay. So if we're going to draw a scatter plot of this data, I'm going to make one suggestion to you. Okay. And that suggestion is the following. When we're dealing with years like we have here, okay, whatever the starting year is, and it's either going to be stated in the problem or it's just going to be the first one on the list. Okay. Instead of actually putting 1996 on your tick marks, okay, what we're going to do instead is we're going to call that year 0. Okay, and then year 1, year 2, year 3, and so on. Okay, and I'm going to show you this not only by hand but also with a calculator in a minute. Okay. So keeping in mind though that you might want to indicate somewhere on your graph that year 0 is 1996, just so you keep straight with the fact that what does 1 represent then? 1 would represent 1997. So instead of doing the actual years on the x-axis, we put the years after the initial year. Okay, so if I did year 3, that would of course correspond to 1999. Okay, and then if I do my scatter plot, if I look at my data here, I want to make appropriate tick marks for that on the left side as well. So I got the lowest I have is 48, the highest I have is 61.5 it looks like. So I might go with my tick marks, I might go by tens, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. And I would suggest that when you do these today that you use graph paper so that your graphs are more accurate than what I'm doing here on the line paper. But and again, when plotting the points, my year 0 it's 60.6. So I would plot that somewhere just a little bit above 60. And then I got 57.1 for year 1. And when we get done with this, we're basically going to have a set of points plotted on our coordinate plane. Fair enough? Okay. Alright, so part of our work we're going to be doing that, which is again just creating a scatter plot. But today we don't have to do anything with that, we just need to create the scatter plot, and that's it. Okay. I am going to show you also on your graphing calculator, just as a review here. The right light here. No, we hit the lights real quick. See it a little better. Right, there you go. Okay, on your graphing calculator, we can also draw a scatter plot, so you can check your work that you do by hand with your calculator by putting the data into the calculator by using the stat key, which is right here below the delete. Okay, so if you hit stat, one of your options here is edit. And in your list 1 and list 2 is where you want to put the data. So we're going to start with 0, which represents 1996, of course, like we said. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this data goes up to 2003. Okay. So that means we're going to go up to 7. Okay, 2003, 7 years after 1999. So we go 0 through 7 on the list 1. And then on our list 2, we'll put the other data. We have 60.6, 57.1, 52, 48.2, 53, 55.2, 54.8, and 61.5. All right, when we get finished with this demonstration today, when we have a little bit of work time, I'll be walking around. So if you have any calculator issues, if your calculator's not working right or you need a refresher on what I just did, that would be a great time to do that as well. So if you watch me next, what we're going to do in order to graph that, okay, we're going to turn on a stat plot, which is above the y equals button on the top. So if you go second, y equals, that gets you into stat plot. You can do 3 of these. We generally probably will only need to do 1 at a time. If you click on number 1, click again, it turns it on instead of off. Should be highlighted on the first one, that's the scatter plot option. So scatter plot, And then just make sure that this says list 1 and list 2 here, because that's where you just put your data. And then the mark, you can either have it plot little boxes or pluses or dots. It's up to you on which one you want to use. I usually use the boxes because they're bigger and you can see it better. Okay. And then before we actually look at the scatter plot, because right now it'll graph it, but the other thing we have to make sure is that our window is good. Otherwise we might not see the points. So if you hit window and look at the data that we had, remember we did year 0 through year 7. So I would probably go maybe -2 to 9, let's say. Okay. Ultimately, with the x in the x direction, we want to go something smaller than the smallest, something bigger than the biggest. Remember, our numbers go from 0 through 7. So I got smaller than the smallest, bigger than the biggest for my x min and my x max. And then for the y min and y max, my numbers went from like 48 to 61. True? So again, smaller than the smallest, maybe I go 45 to 65. Okay, if I do that, then I should be able to see all the points because that window should be accurate for the points that I have on my list. Okay. So once I do that, I'm also going to double check to make sure I don't have anything in y equals, because if I have something in y equals, it's going to plot some curve that I might have. And I don't in this case. If I did, I'd probably just erase it. But at this point, we can go ahead and hit graph. And you can see on your screen the scatter plot. So as such. Okay. Well, questions so far? Like I said, when I have you do some problems here in a minute, I'll be walking around. You can get help on the calculator too if you're having any trouble getting any of those commands to work for you. Okay. The next order of